Chapter 1. Sunday, April 5, 6:49 a.m. Alexa Hampton was awakened by a sensation in her chest. The alarm wasn't set to go off for another 11 minutes, but she knew her sleep was finished. Not again. She rolled over and slapped the blue pillowcase. That little sound from her heart and the twinges of angina, that catch-all for heart discomfort, was happening more and more now, just as Dr. Eckelman had warned her. But she wasn't going to let it stop her from living her life to the fullest as long as she could, and right now that meant having her morning run. She curled her legs around onto the floor, reached for a nitroglycerin tab, and slipped it under her tongue. Known as a vasodilator, the nitro lowered the workload on her heart by expanding her veins. It should get her through the workout. That was when she felt a warm presence rub against her leg. "Hi, baby." Still sucking on the tab, she reached over and tousled Knicker's gray and white hair, then pushed it back from her dog's eyes. Her old English sheepdog, a huge hirsute off-road vehicle, turned and licked her hand. Knickers was ready to hit the trail. She'd been dreaming of Steve when the chest tightness came, and maybe the emotion that stirred up had caused the angina. She still dreamed of him often, and it was always someplace where they had been together and loved, and they were ever on the brink of some disaster. That frequently caused her heart to race, waking her. This time it was the vacation they took 6 years ago in the spring. They were sailing off Norman's Cay in the Bahamas. She was raising the jib, the salt spray in her hair, but then she looked up and realized they were about to ram a reef. She felt the dreams were her unconscious telling her to beware her current precarious condition. If, as is said, at the moment of your passing, your entire life flashes before your eyes, then the dreams were like that, only in slow motion. It was as though she were being prepared for something. The dreams were a premonition. She had a pretty good idea of what. Ally had had rheumatic fever when she was 5, which went undetected long enough to scar a valve in her heart. The formal name was rheumatoid aortic stenosis, a rare, almost freakish condition that had shaped her entire life. The pediatrician at Mount Sinai had told her parents they should think twice about allowing her to engage in any vigorous activity. Her heart's function could be deceptively normal during childhood, but when she got older, well, why stress that organ now and hasten the inevitable day when it could no longer keep up with the rest of her body? She had refused to listen. She'd played volleyball in grade school, basketball in high school, and she became a disciplined runner when she went to Columbia to study architecture. She wanted to prove that you could make your heart stronger if you believed hard enough and wanted to live hard enough. Now, though, it was all catching up. She'd had a complete checkup 2 weeks ago Thursday, including a stress test and Doppler echocardiogram, and Dr. Eckelman had laid out the situation, gazing over her half-lens glasses and pulling at her chin. The normal twinkle in her eyes was entirely absent. "Alexa, your condition has begun worsening. There's a clear aortic murmur now when your pulse goes up. How long can you go on living in denial? You really can't keep on stressing your heart the way you have been. You can have a normal life, but it's got to be low-key. Don't push your luck. Living half a life is so depressing," she declared. Not entirely sure she meant it. "It's almost worse than none at all. Ally, I'm warning you. If you start having chest sensations that don't respond to nitro, call me immediately. I mean that. There's a new drug, ranolazine, that temporarily shifts your heart over to using glucose as a fuel instead of fatty acids and provides more energy for a given amount of oxygen. It will make the pain back off, but I only want to start you on that as a last resort. That's the final stop before open heart surgery and a prosthetic aortic valve." Day by day, the illusion of normality was getting harder and harder to maintain. She had been playing second violin in an amateur string quartet, all the West Village oldies, but a month ago she'd had to drop out. She didn't have the endurance to practice enough to keep up with the others. Blast. It was having to give up things you love that really hurt. Still, she was determined to keep a positive attitude. There was your heart, and then there was heart. You had to understand the difference. She lay back to wait for the alarm and try to compose her mind. This Sunday morning was actually the one day of the year she most dreaded. The anniversary. It had been back when Steve was still alive. They were living in the Chelsea neighborhood of New York in a brownstone townhouse they were renting. The rent was high, but they were doing all right. Steve was a political consultant who had helped some fledgling candidates overcome the odds and win important elections. In between campaigns here, he also got work in the nominal democracies in Latin America. She was a partner in a small firm of architects who had all been at Columbia together and decided to team up after graduation and start a business. There were 4 of them, she was the only woman, and it was a struggle at the beginning. For the first 3 years, they had to live off crumbs tossed there by the big boys, subcontracts from Skidmore and other giants. They felt like they were a high-paid version of Manpower, Inc., doing grunt work, designing the interiors of shopping malls in the Midwest and banks in Saudi Arabia, while their prime contractors got to keep all the sexy, big-budget jobs that called for creativity, like a glass and steel office tower in LA. But then interesting work finally started to trickle in, including a plum job to convert a massive parking garage in Greenwich Village into a luxury condominium. Through a wild coincidence, or luck, she had personally designed the apartment she later ended up buying for herself, just when everything seemed to be turning her around and going her way. An event happened that stopped her in her tracks. 5 years ago on this very day, April 5, her mother, Nina, phoned her at 6:30 in the morning and in a trembling voice that still haunted, announced that her father was dead. Arthur Wade Hampton was 59, and he'd been cleaning his Browning shotgun for an early morning hunting trip to Long Island, so he'd claimed the night before, and she was awakened by the explosion of a discharge. A horrible accident in the kitchen of their co-op in the West Village, like Hemingway. Thinking back, they both realized it was the wrong time of year to hunt anything, but they both also knew he wanted the world to think that. Moreover, it was precisely the kind of vital lie they'd need to get through the pointed questions and skeptical looks that lay ahead. It was a knowledge all the more palpable for being unspoken. There's no time like those first moments after a tragedy to create a special reality for yourself. It was only in the aftermath that she managed to unravel the reason. He owned and operated an interior design firm in Soho called Seedy Space, and he had mortgaged it to the hilt. He was on a verge of bankruptcy. That was why Ally had not spoken to her younger brother, Grant, in the last 4-1/2 years. She felt she had no choice but to try to salvage what was left of the business and her father's reputation. She left the architectural firm and took over Seedy Space. It turned out she was easily as good an interior designer as she had been an architect, and before long she had a backlog of work and was adding staff. She restructured and eventually paid off the firm's debt. It was now on a sound financial footing. These days, Seedy Space specialized in architectural rehabs in the Greenwich Village area, with as many Soho and Tribeca lofts as came her way. The work was mostly residential, but lately some lucrative commercial office jobs were beginning to walk through the door. Anything dependent on luxury real estate can be vulnerable in dicey times, but she'd been able to give everybody a holiday bonus for the past couple of years. She'd even given herself one this year, in the form of this new condo apartment, which she loved. Another major reason she'd taken over Seedy Space was to try to provide her mother some peace and dignity in her twilight years. But then, irony of ironies, Nina, who was a very lively 66, was diagnosed 18 months ago with early-onset Alzheimer's. Now her consciousness was rapidly slipping away. All the things that had happened over the last few years had called for a special kind of heart. She had known Steve Jensen, a freelance political consultant, for 8 years, and they'd lived together for 3 of those before they got married. He was warm and tender and sexy, and she'd envisioned them in rocking chairs 40 years down the road. They'd been married for only 6 months when he got a job to help re-elect the president of Belize. At first he was reluctant, concerned about human rights issues, but then he decided the other candidate, the alternative, was even worse. So he went. How many things can be destined to go wrong in your life? Exactly 7 months after her dad died, she received a phone call from the American Embassy in Belmopan, Belize. Steve had been flying with the presidential candidate over a stretch of southern rainforest in a single-engine Cessna. A sudden thunderstorm came out of the Caribbean, and the plane lost. ADO contact. That was the last, etc. She rushed there, but after 2 weeks the rescue officially became a recovery mission. Except there was never any recovery. After 2 months she flew back alone, the loneliest plane ride of her life. She still had his clothes in her closet, as though to keep hope alive. You love someone so much you think you could never live without them, and then one day you're forced to. It resets your thinking. Her dad's death and then Steve's. She wanted to love life, but life sometimes felt like it was asking more than she should have to give. She currently had no one special to spend her weekends with, but she hadn't given up, nor was she pushing it. All things in time, except time could be running out. BRRRing went the alarm, and Knickers responded with a lively woof. She was anxious to get going. Come on, baby, Ally said. Time for a treat. She struggled up and made her way into the kitchen and got down a box of small rawhide chews. It would give Knickers something to occupy her mind for the few minutes it took to get ready, since she lived at the west end of Barrow Street, right across the highway from the new Hudson River. Park Esplanade that defined that mighty river's New York bank. She had a perfect course for her morning runs. She usually liked to run down to the park at the rejuvenated Battery Park City and then back. She didn't know what the distance was exactly, maybe 3/4 of a mile each way, maybe slightly more, but it fit her endurance nicely. The weather was still cool enough in the mornings that Knickers could accompany her at full trot. In the heat of summer, however, they both had to cut back. She'd put on blue sweats, got her Walkman prepped with a Beethoven quintet, and was just finishing cinching her running shoes when the phone jangled. Sunday, April 5, 7:18 a.m. Grant Hampton listened to the ringing and felt the sweat on his palms. For a normal person, this would be an insane time to call, but knowing his nutbag sister, she was probably already up and about to go out for her daily run. And this on a Sunday morning. For Chris' sake, when rational people were drinking coffee or having sex, or doing something sensible like retrieving the Times from the hallway and reading the columns in the business section. He had left Tanya, his runway model live-in, to get her beauty sleep and had driven downtown at this unthinkable hour on a mission. He was chief financial officer of Bartlett Medical Devices, Inc., which was in imminent danger of going under and taking him with it. Come on, Ally. Pick up the frigging phone. He gazed out the windshield of his blue Porsche, now parked directly across the street from Alexa's lobby, and tried to calm his pulse. He hadn't entirely worked out the pitch, but that was okay because he won. To sound spontaneous. Who was it said, sincerity, if you can just fake that, you've got it made. That was what, hello. Thank God she's picked up. Hi, sis, remember the sound of my voice? Long time, right? Come on, he thought. Give me an opening here. There was a pause that Grant Hampton thought lasted an eternity. You picked a funny time to call. Is that all she has to say? 4.5 frigging years she shuts me out of her life, blaming me. And then, well, Ally, I figured there's gotta be a statute of limitations on being accused of something I didn't do. So I decided to take a flyer that maybe 4 years and change was in the ballpark. Grant, do you know what time it is? This is Sunday and... Hey, this is the hour you do your Sunday run, right? If memory serves. So I thought I might drive down and keep you company. He didn't want to let her know that he was already there. That would seem presumptuous and probably tick her off even more. But by God, he had to get to her. Again, there was a long pause, like she was trying to collect and marshal her anger. You want to come to see me now? That's a heck of a... Look, there's something really important I need to talk to you about. It's actually a big favor for you, sis. You've surely heard of Winston Bartlett. I've also heard of Donald Trump. So? Well, he's got a clinic out in New Jersey that... Grant, I know you're a big shot in his medical conglomerate or whatever it is, but I'm not interested in whatever you're peddling. I'm going out to run now. I heard the sound of the phone clicking off without so much as a goodbye. Jesus, he thought, she really is ticked. This is going to be harder than I thought. Okay, here goes plan B. He started the Porsche and slowly back to the corner of Washington Street, where he parked again and then hunkered down, loving the smell of the new leather seat. Ally was going to come charging out of the front door in about 2 minutes with that damned sheepdog that Steve gave her, assuming it was still around. Grant Hampton was 3 years younger than Alexa, and he lived in a different world. Whereas she'd never wanted to be anything but an architect, he had aimed directly for NYU School of Business. After that, he had gone to Wall Street and gotten a broker's license, and begun an extremely lucrative career as a bond trader for Goldman Sachs. He discovered he had the nerves, as well as a gift for handling big numbers in his head. Soon, he had a duplex co-op on the 26th floor of a new building on 3rd Avenue in the East 60s. He loved the money, and the pad. He also liked how easy it was to pick up models at downtown clubs if you had your own co-op. A Porsche, and were 6 feet tall with a designer wardrobe. That was where he met Tanya, also 6 feet tall, a striking, natural redhead who did a lot of runway work for Chloe. He thought he was making a lot of money, but Anya, who could order a $200 bottle of Dom Perignon to have something to pass the time while the hors d'oeuvres were being whipped up at Nabu, taught him he was just barely getting by. She was accustomed to screwing men who had some depth to their money, but when he tried a financial endeavor on the side, it turned into a disaster. Time to move on. He sent around his resume and managed to get an interview with BMD, which was looking for someone to help them edge their exposure in foreign currencies. The next thing he knew, he was trading bonds for Winston Bartlett's personal account. When Bartlett's CFO died of a heart attack at age 49, while undergoing oral sex in the backs of a chauffeured Lincoln Town car, Grant Hampton got temporarily drafted to take over his responsibilities. That was 2 years ago. He was aggressive enough that there was never a search for a replacement. He had made the big time, and he had done it before he was 35, but now it all hung in the balance. If this didn't work out, he could end up cold-calling widows out of Dun and Bradstreet, hawking third-rate IPO. Tanya would be gone in a heartbeat. Ally were with me for Chris' sake. Sunday, April 5, 7:57 a.m. As Alexa stepped out of the lobby, the morning was glorious and clear. Spring had arrived in a burst of pear and cherry blossoms in the garden of St. Luke's Church. Up the street, but here by the river the morning air was still brisk enough to make her skin tingle. The sun was lightening the east, setting a golden halo above the skyscrapers of Midtown. Here, with the wind tasting lightly of salt, the roadways were Sunday morning silent, and it was a magic time that always made her feel the world was young and perfect, and she was capable of anything. This was her private thinking time, even dreaming time, and she shared it only with Knickers, who was trotting along beside her now, full of enthusiasm. Ally suspected that her sheepdog enjoyed their morning runs along the river even more than she did. As she headed south, toward Battery Park City, she pondered the weird phone all she'd just gotten from Grant Seth Hampton. That was his full name. She called him Grant, but her mother, Nina, always called him Seth. Unfortunately, by whatever name, Grant Seth Hampton, an unremitting hustler, was still her brother. She wished it were not so, but some things couldn't be changed. In truth, she actually thought Grant had exhibited a kind of sequential personality over his life. When they were kids, he'd seemed rakish but also decent. At the time, of course, she was impulsive and rebellious herself, admiring of his spunk. Now she viewed that as his early personality. Later, when he was pushing 30 and the Wall Street pressure and the coke moved in, he evolved into personality. Number 2. He lost touch with reality, and in the process he also lost his inner moral compass. His character bent and then broke under the stress, proving, she now supposed, that he was actually a weak reed after all. Now she did know what his personality was. Grant, she often lamented. How did everything manage to turn out so bad with you? He'd been a bond trader for Goldman, and at family gatherings he'd brag about making 300,000 a year. But he had a high-maintenance lifestyle involving downtown models he was constantly trying to impress with jewelry and expensive vacations, so that wasn't enough. He decided to freelance on the side. He set up a website and, with his broker's license, opened a retail business trading naked futures contracts on treasuries. He managed to get some naive clients and for a while made a profit for them. But then the market turned against him, or maybe. He lost his rabbit's foot, and he began losing a lot of other people's money. A couple of his clients with heavy losses felt that he'd misrepresented the risk, and they were getting ready to sue. They also were threatening to file a complaint. At the SEC, there was a real possibility he could be barred from the financial industry for life. The only thing that would put the matter to rest was if he made good some of their losses. But Grant, who lived hand-to-mouth no matter what his income, didn't have any liquidity. A reserve? That's for guys who don't have any balls. She pieced this story together after the fact. Somehow he'd gotten to their father, who bailed him out mainly to save the family from disgrace. So he had mortgaged seedy space right up to the breaking point, and she finally unraveled this poignant tale. She realized her father believed he was going to have to declare bankruptcy and close the firm, laying everybody off and leaving Nina a pauper. He thought the only way to save the family from ruin was to collect on his life insurance. Unfortunately, however, he botched the plan. Nobody believed his death was accidental, and suicide voided the $3 million policy. Grant had always inhabited another planet from her dad, but surely these days he was able to support any lifestyle he chose. For the last 2 years, he'd been some kind of hotshot financial manager for the high-stakes conglomerate owned by Winston Bartlett, or so Nina said. He should be making big bucks. Had he managed to screw that up somehow? Anytime he came crawling back to the family for anything, it was because he was in some kind of rubble. She hadn't seen him in so long she wondered if she'd even recognize him, not that she had any plans to see him. But what could Grant possibly want from her now? Also, why would he pick this morning, this anniversary morning, to reappear? Didn't he know what day this was? Or maybe he didn't actually care. He'd been living on the east side that fateful morning of their dad's death, in a doorman co-op he surely couldn't afford, and she'd taken a cab there to tell him in person rather than do it over the phone. When she did, her voice breaking, she could see his eyes already filtering out any part of it that touched him. By today, he'd probably purged it out of his memory entirely. She had reached the vast lawn that had been built on the landfill behind Stuyvesant High, the Hudson River on one side, and the huge expanse of green on the other. It was manicured and verdant, a la Grand Jet expanse of grass where you could see visions of wicker picnic baskets and bottles of Beaujolais. The space was deserted now and smelled of new grass. Knickers had gotten 10 paces ahead of her, as though impatient that Alexa was slowing her down. But then she paused in mid-stride to sniff at a bagel somebody had tossed. "Come on, honey." Ally caught up with her, wheezing. "Time to backtrack. My chest is getting tight again. Goodies at home." Knickers glared at her dolefully for a moment, not buying the argument. "Let's go." She resumed her stride back north, hoping Knickers would follow. Home. Her senses must have been slowing down too, because she honestly didn't hear him when he came up behind her 3 minutes later. Sunday, April 5, 8:29 a.m. "Didn't think I could keep up, did you?" Grant Hampton quipped from 10 paces back. "Guess you didn't know I've started playing handball every other morning, half an hour with the man. Great for the stamina, not to mention nosing the boss, since naturally I let him win." She doesn't look half bad, he thought. Maybe she's getting out ahead of that heart problem. Maybe she's actually okay and I'm screwed. Fuck. But why is she still so fried at me? Sure. I had a little trouble, but everybody has ups and downs. Nina, that hard-hearted bitch, wants to blame me for Arthur's death, when it was nobody's fault but his own that the old fart pulled the plug. Hell, I was going to pay back the money. He just didn't believe in me. He never did. "What are you doing here, Grant?" When she turned to look back at him, She realized she wasn't prepared for this moment at all, but here he was, complete with a trendy unning outfit. She'd only seen him a couple of times after the funeral, and he looked like life was treating him well. The perfect tan, the lush sandy hair with an expensive cut that covered the top of his ears like a precise little helmet. He was a touch over 6 feet, with athletic shoulders, a trim figure, and a graceful fluidity to his stride. No wonder he scores with models. Damn, how could such a creep look that great? I told you, I'm trying to do you a fave. He momentarily pulled ahead, as though to head her off, then looked back and grinned. She thought she detected a vaguely demented quality in his gray eyes. Hey, I've turned my life around, ally. Lots of good karma. I'm CFO for EMD, and WB lets me handle a lot of his personal investing, too. She put on a burst of energy, trying unsuccessfully to get out ahead of him. Even though she'd rehearsed this inevitable moment over and over in her mind, she hadn't realized that seeing him again would be this upsetting. Why was he here? But now that he was, maybe she ought to momentarily let go of the anger long enough to find out what he wanted. Fortunately, they were almost back to Barrow Street, so this was going to be quick. No way was she going to ask him up. Look, Grant declared over his shoulder, I think it's high time to admit I've been a shit, to you and to a lot of people. Now he slowed enough that she pulled alongside. For a long time there, back when I worked for Goldman, I was an immature asshole, but at least I'm mature enough now to admit it. I think the window for owning up is past. She didn't need his belated mea culpa. Nothing was going to bring their father back, and having a scene on this anniversary day would only demean his memory. Sometimes it's better just to let things rest. No, that's wrong, ally, and I want to try and start making amends. Or all the money Dad helped me out with, I want to do a kindness for you, to repay you and Mom as best I can. Now he was jogging along beside her as smooth as a stroll, barely breathing. It was adding to her humiliation. Gran. It's a little fucking late for that. Dad's gone. Money's not going to bring him back. And I'm okay, Mom's okay at least for money. Well, she thought, that's true for now, but who knows what lies ahead? So what's a couple of million or so between siblings anyway? Right, it's the price of finding out who everybody is. Just now, she told herself, the biggest kindness he could do would be to disappear. Forever. She thought she was over the bulk of the pain and the feelings of humiliation, but seeing him again, hearing his voice, and looking at his eyes was bringing all of it back. She realized she was never going to be over it. Ally, go ahead and say whatever you need to. Look, I can't really do anything about the money, at least not right this minute, though I've got a big ship on the horizon, assuming a deal I'm working on comes through. But right now I'm about to try to do you a favor. I think I can muddle through without any of your favors, Grant. And I really don't appreciate your showing up out of the blue like this, bullying your way back into my life. She glanced over and saw his gray eyes were hangdog. It was the soulful look he used to melt her resolve. But not this time. She was yelling at herself inside not to give an inch. If she let him anywhere close to her life again, she was sure she'd only regret it. Well, like it or not, I am here at the moment, he said, once more jogging a pace ahead, then twisting his head back. They were at the crossing, and he could see her building from where they were. He had to get a hook into her before she disappeared into that damned lobby. Time for the bait. By the way, ally, how's your ticker? Doing these days you still have to watch out for. That heart thing? Look, Grant, I've got a busy morning. I'm going up to see Mom, not that you'd give a damn. So thank you for inquiring about my health, but frankly, what do you care? She paused. Tell you what, if your favor is so wonderful, I'll give you one phone call, tonight at home. She had Nicker's leash on a short hold and was waiting for the light to change. But I've got to go now. Shit, he thought, the hook didn't catch. Can't be on the phone, I'm telling you. I needed to see you. Why the hell do you think I took the trouble to catch you before your day got started? You know I hate getting up this early. He stepped onto the curb and stopped. Ally, please listen. This is something I can do for you. I won't insult you by saying it's for old time's sake, but in a way it is. I got you a shot at a big job. Bartlett wants to redo the ground floor of his place on Gramercy Park. I told him about seedy space and he sounded interested and said he'd like for you to come by and meet him and help him kick around some ideas. She looked at him, not believing a word. You hacked into my life. At 7 o'clock Sunday morning for that, you had to see me. Give me a break. What do you really want? And this better be good. Okay, he thought, cut to the chase. You're correct. It's about your heart. What about it? Make it real. He told himself, this could be your only shot. All right, here's the unvarnished deal. What I really did for you. About 5 years ago, Bartlett bankrolled a startup biomed firm called the Jerex Corporation. It was the brainchild of a Dutch doctor whose research project had just been sawed off at the knees by Stanford University. Then, Bartlett moved the entire operation to a clinic at the BMD campus out in New Jersey called the Dorian Institute. It's all very hush-hush, but I can tell you Jerex has a new procedure in clinical trials that can literally work miracles. The head researcher, this Dutch doctor, has pioneered a new treatment using a stem cell procedure to trick an organ into regenerating itself, even a heart. It's like you grow your own transplant. Now she was finally listening. I was talking to the Dutch guy late last week, he went on, picking up a faint positive vibe and hoping desperately he could build on it. And he said he's looking for someone in their 30s with a rheumatic heart thing. I think it's like what you have to be part of this big clinical trial they're wrapping up. But they have to do it immediately so they can put the data in their final report to the National Institutes of Health. And you thought about me. That's very touching, Grant. Your idea of doing me a favor is to let some Dutch quack experiment on me? Hey, don't be so fast. To turn up your nose at this. Shit, he thought, how am I going to make any headway? His procedure operates at the cell level. The way they say it works is he takes cells from your bone marrow or blood or whatever and makes them immortal with this special enzyme and then injects them into organ tissue. It causes that organ to start regenerating itself. That sounds completely like science fiction. Besides, I'm not well, he's doing it. Trust me. But there are only a couple of weeks left in the clinical trials, so everything's on a fast track now. If you're the least bit interested, you've got to call him tomorrow. If you don't, I'm sure he'll find somebody else by the middle of the week. He reached down and tried to give Knickers a pat, but she drew away. Good for her, Ally thought. Then he looked up and his voice grew animated. Ally, the Dutch doctor, his name is Van de Vliet, by the way, is the smartest man I've ever met. I'd say he's a good bet for the Nobel Prize in Medicine this time next year. I'd put my last dime on it. What he's doing is so incredible I shouldn't even be talking about it. At least not till the clinical trials are finished, but I wanted to do you this favor. She thought. What it amounted to was, he was coming to her with another one of his hustles. Probably they needed somebody to round out their clinical trials, and she was conveniently hand. You know, Grant, maybe I'll just pass. I already have a cardiologist. She found herself wondering what Dr. Eckelman would say to this radical new treatment. All right, Ally, you want to make me beg. I need you to. This. When I described you to Dr. Van de Vliet, I could tell he was very excited. This could change everything for you. He paused, perhaps becoming aware of the pleading tone in his voice. For Chris' sake, give me a break. Is there place we can have coffee? I'm not asking to come upstairs or anything. I just want to see if we can be on speaking terms long enough to help each other out. In a way, she was relieved, though she was secretly hurt all over again. He wasn't crawling back to her to beg forgiveness for destroying lives. No, he was back and groveling because he thought she could help him butter up his boss. How could she not feel used? God, that was so like him. At that moment, she knew there was never any chance he'd change. Come on, he said again. A lousy cup of coffee. There's that little French bistro on Hudson Street. He tried a grin. Hey, I'll even buy. For a moment she thought she felt her resolve slipping. It's funny, but after you break up a family, no matter how dysfunctional, you start repressing the bad memories. But then something comes along to remind you all over again. Grant, are you hearing yourself? She stared at him. You sound like you're selling snake oil. Why was I afraid you'd back off? You're really doing it because you're pissed. Okay, you've got a right, but I've brought you something I think you ought to at least look at. He was unzipping his fanny pack and icking out a Xerox Corporation envelope, folded in half. Christ, he thought miserably, why is she doing this to me? I've got to keep the door open. Read this and then give me a call tonight like you promised. It'll tell you more. About him. She hesitated before taking it. It was thick with papers and she was planning to spend the day visiting Nina. I think I've heard enough already. Just look at his CV. Van de V. Lyotts. He's done a lot of things. You've got to take him seriously. He urged it into her hand. Look at it and call me, please. She took it and then she reached down and patted Knickers. Come on, baby, let's go up. He watched her disappear into the lobby and start shooting. The breeze with the doorman, some red-haired jerk with a ponytail who'd just come on duty. Damn. Maybe the best thing would be just to chloroform her and let her wake up in the lab. WB needs her.